Hi there. So I got sent a video of Oren being interviewed by Tucker Carlson by someone that I respect this person a lot, and I do trust their opinion like implicitly. So, but it's Tucker Carlson. Can't stand the guy. Never have, and I'm pretty much center right Republican. Have been my entire life. From the stupid bow ties of the 2000s to the LL Bean catalog that threw up on him in his studio in the 2020s. Um, can't stand the guy. You know, West Coast, East Coast. I mean, frankly, let's face it, he's a wealthy elite, best colleges. Um, you know, entire wealth, money, everything else, straight from the quote media elites that he decries daily. And the minute it backfired on him, he whined like you wouldn't believe. And now he's independent media. Okay, whatever. Yeah, he's champion of the little guy, right? Everything the guy does is an affectation. I mean, he's an empty suit. Just fill with whatever ideas you want, and he'll parrot them back if it makes him a buck. But I suspect that's not why I got sent the video. I'm pretty sure it's for his guest, a gentleman by the name of Oren Cass. Um, so, with that being said, here's Oren Cass. Um, again, this guy being said to opinions on one family. Specifically, I think him and Tucker Carlson are one of those that believe that childless people have no role in our society and that we should be paying more anyway. Well, first of all, childless people pay more anyway. We pay for public schools that we do not utilize. We pay for increased taxes, no child tax credit, no deductions, nothing else. So we pay a ton more in taxes. A ton. It's staggering how much more. And quite frankly, reasons why people are childless are freaking, again, I'm my base philosophy, and this goes back my entire time when Republican Party, since the party like left me. I'm now like a Bill Kristol kind of Republican. Um, is if it doesn't bother me, leave us alone. If it doesn't bother you, leave us alone. Period. Um, just get out of our lives. Leave us alone. None of your business. But that being said, again, I don't think that portion of what he was talking about was the reason it was sent to me. So I won't get too far into it because that's probably his views on that are probably an entirely different video, whole separate video. But I like to, before I really dig into a person's opinion, I like to kind of figure out what their background is, kind of where they're coming from. And here's Oren Katz. Again, in the video with Tucker, he talks about how his parents worked on a kibbutz in Israel, and that's where they met. He was raised in the United States, and I'm not sure. I should probably research this first, but I think a kibbutz is more like a co-op or kind of like a commune here in the States. So his parents kind of lived off the community, so to speak. However, interesting state that he just kind of drops in there. His grandfather was an acclaimed trial attorney. Well, trial attorneys are typically very wealthy, and the guy lives in East Coast, Boston area, Williams College, and then went to Harvard. Yes, that's how you have to have it. Harvard. He went to Harvard, and when it was at Harvard is when he started working for the Mitt Romney campaign. So, and then from there, he's basically that's what he's done. I mean, the guy has not. I would. They use the term. I probably would use it. He's never done an honest day's work in his life. Let's face it. I mean, I've got scars all over my hands from working on a factory line for the family business. I would wager to say he does not. He has never collected a paycheck from like actual like labor or like working or sweating hard. He has either collected a government paycheck, which of course that's bad, very bad right now, very bad, or donor money, again, very bad. So I went into this with a bit of a skeptical perspective, just based on this guy's background, right? I mean, I grew up in the Republican Party where, you know, it was the liberal elites, never worked a day in their life, no honest labor, that are trying to tell us what to do. And now Republicans have joined those ranks. So here's the conservative thought leader, who is talking about how we need to bring manufacturing back and his trade policy and everything else, that has literally never lived a life where the decisions he's making would actually impact his livelihood. And so, again, making decisions for the rest of us without having to walk in our shoes. Tucker's the same way. And, all I'll say about Tucker is what he's talking about here and what he talks about in most of his shows and everything else. Let's face it. If he woke up, this is kind of a Chris Rock line, but I think it is appropriate and it's kind of funny. If Tucker Carlson woke up tomorrow with a wife, 2 loving kids, and had to go work in a let's just GM factory line, he would slit his throat. He would. If he woke up tomorrow and his media empire and money were gone and he just had to go and work the life that he thinks the rest of us should do, he would literally kill himself. So that being said, back to Oren. First, I think the one thing that stuck out to me about him, and it was just one that just hit a little bit, is his funny little anecdote about how when he started to work on the Romney campaign, he was asked to, research policy on how to solve the opioid crisis. And he was like, I didn't even know what the opioid crisis was. All right, this guy is roughly my age. So he's born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. And, here's the clip on the.
If you're in that percentage that's been benefiting and continues to benefit from the current arrangement, it's hard to understand how you don't look around and think to yourself, this isn't working for like the overwhelming majority of people, and that's bad. Like, if that doesn't occur to you, what does it say about you?
It's a fair question. I guess, one reason I have maybe sympathy is strong, but a sense of it is I even look at, my own trajectory going through a lot of these same institutions and kinds of jobs. I ended up working for Mitt Romney's presidential campaign.
After graduating Harvard?
Yes. Well, actually, I was still in law school at Harvard. Was in charge of domestic policy for the Romney campaign. And questions would come in, what are we going to do about the opioid epidemic? And I'm embarrassed to say this, I'm hopping on Google, trying to like, what is opioid? Like opium? I mean, I literally had no idea. And at that point, it had already been the deadliest drug epidemic in American, probably for going on a decade at that point. And it was extremely easy to not even know it existed.
Yeah, so that's Oren. Yeah, I sped up the audio because, quite frankly, ain't nobody got time for that. I mean, it was an hour and a half long interview, so I sped it up because some of these points are very important, and he's not all wrong at all. But this one stuck out to me because it's like, really, dude? Really? You didn't know what the opium epidemic was? Someone who grew up in the 90s? I mean, you didn't. So basically, he's saying, Pulp Fiction? Didn't watch it. New Jack City? No thank you. Train Spotting? I mean, he didn't listen to Nine Inch Nails or Velvet Underground. He just totally missed the heroin chic of the 90s. Seriously? I mean, what? Opium? I have no idea. Are you talking about actual, like, opium? Like an opium den? Oh my gosh. Yeah, so that one stuck out to me. And then, but I will say this. They talk a lot about rural living and rural communities. So I happen to be in one. And a lot of the things I see the current crop of Republicans talking about, MAGA Republicans, are really issues that Democrats, the Democratic Party raised, and most of the times Republicans were in lockstep on solving. But it is a fact that in the 50s and 60s, um, the Republicans essentially set out to somewhat destroy rural farming communities, mainly because farmers at the time were a solidly Democratic voting bloc, primarily because of FDR, because of the Farm Bill, solving the Dust Bowl and the absolute collapse of the Great Depression on farms. So my grandparents were staunchly Democratic, um, and they were a farm family, and that's the case. Now that current crop are pretty much all died out. So I will say, like, um, that's not necessarily the case anymore. But a lot of those smaller communities, there were policies Republicans put in place specifically to kind of disrupt or shut down those communities, like municipal consolidation, shutting down post offices that served smaller, like underserved post offices. These are all things that happened through like the Nixon era and throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, um, including school consolidation. That's a big one because for most rural communities, I don't think this is necessarily the case on the East Coast or the West Coast, but in the Midwest, communities are built around the school corporation. They're built around the school. That is where the community gathers. That's where the social interaction is. Um, it's where a lot of it's usually the biggest facility in most of these places. And so school consolidation did a really good job of kind of dismantling smaller communities. For instance, in my area, there were made like four municipalities. Mine, another fairly large one, and then there were two smaller ones. And first round, those two smaller communities lost their post office. And then in the 70s, when school consolidation came, the one of the criteria on whether a school community would lose their school and it would be consolidated into another town then was whether they had a post office. So those two towns, smaller towns, lost their schools, their public schools, and those got consolidated into the school corporation, which I went to. And those towns essentially are now basically just fire districts. They don't have, there's no town, so to speak. They cease to exist as municipalities and communities. So that's one of the things. That being said, I'm not here to talk about the rise and fall of the rural American empire. Mostly to discuss the tariff question. I'm gonna play some clips and then just kind of the thoughts on those. In general, I really don't think Oren has a very good basis in history, or he just smooths it over because let's face it, he's on Tucker Carlson. He knows who Tucker Carlson is. He's got ties to Rubio. He's got ties, the guy is embedded in the Trump administration. And let's face it, going against Trump as the Trump administration is not conducive to a long life in the Republican Party. So yeah, his actual think tank policy proposals, which I'll throw up here. I've read through these. Not so bad actually. Honestly, I think a lot of the child stuff comes from Israel, and some of what he talks about on the child and the family thing here, he does talk about increasing birth rates and incentivizing that and everything else. And I looked, and quite frankly, that's just not a thing anymore. It is for agrarian societies because there's a high child mortality rate, so you need plus children are free labor to work on a farm. But as a society industrializes, and now we're in post-industrialization, the need for children has declined greatly. And in fact, there's only one post-industrial country that has a birth rate that is above sustainment or replacement, and that is Israel. Who'd have thought? And their policies that they want to institute for policies they have instituted in order to accomplish look like this. Direct financial incentives, subsidized health care, paid maternity leave, pro-family social policies. However, for Israel, part of why they're doing this is because they are trying to keep the Jewish majority. That's why they have these whole things instituted. Israel's a bit of an odd thing. So they are trying to keep the Jewish majority in a theocratic state that has a high population of Arabs and Palestinians. So really, I don't want to say replacement theory, but these policies are designed to try and maintain the Jewish majority in their country. And that's it. However, if you look at these policies, these are democratic policy proposals, period. Beginning and end. These are this is basically the Democratic Party platform. So take that for what you will. I would suspect in order to accomplish what he wants, these are the policies or something very similar would have to be enacted. So take that for what it's worth. So we'll go back to his think tank's website. I'm really not. I don't know if it's worth going through all what he says in the video. I'm going to pull up some clips in no particular order, but his actual policy pages, bringing back America's shipbuilding capacity, that directly relates to our military preparedness. Totally on board. Critical minerals. We should have been doing this forever. These are no, and buried in here somewhere there is one of his colleagues that talks about reinstating Glass-Steagall, which I am 100% on board with, and also putting some teeth into the anti-monopoly, antitrust department of the DOJ. Teddy Roosevelt is my favorite president, and that is literally what he did. It was trust busting. Part of what Oren fails to consider, and this is kind of a second order consequence or a third order consequence, is with bringing back American manufacturing, it's going to be very balkanized. There are going to be certain areas that are going to be overloaded with certain industries, and that creates regional monopolies. My current region has a significant regional monopoly that does choke out other businesses. So if these policies can do anything about that, I'm 100% on board. Go for it. Nail it. But he doesn't talk about that in the Tucker Carlson video. It's just something I found in my research on Oren and his organization. So going back, I'm going to add to the stage.
Response have you received as like one of the best known tariff proponents?
Yeah, it has been a fascinating time since the administration started, especially after Liberation Day. My view is that the direction that Trump and the administration are going is exactly the right.
Okay, right off the bat, he called it Liberation Day. I mean, okay.
One, that the willingness to focus on how globalization failed, that free trade isn't real, it has not worked out the way it was promised, we need to move on to something else, is exactly right. The fact that they're willing to acknowledge it has costs and that we should bear those costs is extraordinary. I mean, how long has it been since we had politicians who were actually willing to stand up and say, yes, this isn't just a free lunch, there are actual costs here and we think they're worth it. And I think that's right too.
It's such a good point.
And it's the irony, of course, is it's exactly the very important people, very serious people in the newspaper columns and so forth who've been complaining like, oh, politicians won't do this, they won't be serious. You finally get President Trump and Secretary Bessent, people who are willing to say these things, and immediately everybody attacks. How dare you suggest we should accept any costs? How, look at these fools saying, and it's like, no, this is exactly what actual leadership looks like. This is what we need if we are going to get back out of the hole that we've dug. I think that being said, especially when you are doing this kind of thing that does have upfront costs, you're kind of making an investment for a payout down the road. You have to be really careful to keep those costs as low as you can and make sure you're setting yourself for as much of the return as you can. And, I think in some of the sort of, frankly, chaos that we've seen in changes in the policy, a lot of people not necessarily being clear on, okay, where are we going and why? I think in some cases the costs have been higher than they have to be. And I think it's been really encouraging to see, really after Liberation Day, a bunch of shifts that have improved things. So I'm somebody who thinks tariffs are good, we should have them, but you should phase them in. You should give.
Agreed, wholeheartedly. Tariffs can be a good thing. Operative word can. Tariffs need a very precise implementation. This is not it. Now, he's still going to argue in later on here that just a base 10%, and that's the 10% cost of business and cost of business doing business in America. We have a standard duty. I think it's like 7.5%, 8%. So unless specifically negotiated via treaty, there's just a flat. There's already a flat percentage to do business in the United States. So I don't know if he's being disingenuous about this or he doesn't really know. The first is a problem. The second is an even bigger problem.
People time to adjust. And so now we've started doing that, right? Tariffs were paused, so we have negotiations. With China, they've now come back down a bunch, so we have negotiations. I think what we should have is a very clear commitment that down the road, 2 or 3 years out, for the long run, countries that are not playing by the rules, obviously China, countries that are not willing to take a balanced approach to trade, yes, there are going to be tariffs. There are going to be obstructions. And if you are somebody who wants to do business in America, you need to start planning for that. And you need to invest more in America. And going back to Adam Smith and what the paragraph about the invisible hand actually says, if we want our economy to work well, it has to be one where the way to make a lot of money in America is by making things in America.
Okay, so even here, we're still talking at the macro level. His argument is not necessarily tariffs should get foreign companies to invest in manufacturing in the United States. It's not necessarily to bolster the manufacturing sector of the United States. That's where he's currently at, because I think even he recognizes that foreign investment is going to happen. It's always happened. In fact, the problem is blanket tariff policy. Let's go to another clip here.
Actually did this, right? People go, oh, Ronald Reagan, free trader. Like, not true. The Libertarian Cato Institute, when Reagan left office, Cato called him the worst protectionist since Herbert Hoover. Especially vis-a-vis Japan, Reagan had no patience for the trading relationship as it was working. And under threat of tariffs, just as Trump is doing now, Reagan went to the Japanese and said, the way that you are flooding our market with Japanese-made automobiles cannot continue. And the Japanese, not wanting the tariffs, said, okay, we will voluntarily cap how much we import into the United States, and we will instead send Honda and Toyota to go invest in the United States. And the entire American auto industry in the American South is a function of Reagan saying, free trade does not work here. You need to come invest here. And lo and behold, American workers can build great cars, including Hondas and Toyotas. The Toyota Camry has more American-made content in it than anything coming out of Detroit. And that was an extraordinary success.
Really?
Yes. Because it wasn't just, so the first thing that happens is the assembly plant comes over. Once this is a place where you're assembling, well, now it makes sense to move the supply chains over. Now it makes sense. Now they have research and development facilities here. If this is how these countries got everything from us, they took the American manufacturers and said, come over here instead. And it all moved. In a case where we've actually said, no, you have to bring it here, that works too. And the other great example we're seeing now is with semiconductors, right? We have what's called the CHIPS Act, where it basically said, wow, it's a huge mistake that America, inventor of the semiconductor, pioneer of pretty much everything chips related, we just said we didn't care. We let it all go overseas, right? The reason Taiwan, it's not because Taiwan's beaches are made out of silicon. There's nothing special about Taiwan. The Taiwanese government said, we're going to lead in chips. And now that the U.S. has said, no, we're going to lead in chips, and Taiwan Semiconductor is making, $60 billion, now another $100 billion of investment in Arizona, their first plant is coming online. And they actually said the yield's coming out of it. So basically the quality of the chip manufacturing in Arizona is already better than in Taiwan. So we can do it, but it's a policy choice of whether we care and whether we're going to do it.
So, can't make everything. What should we make? So if you were in charge of reshoring manufacturing to the United States, what would be the industries that would get priority?
So I think there are a few that you really give priority to because they have some kind of unique strategic value, either for defense purposes or because of the way supply chains grow up around them. And so chips is a great example of this.
Yes, 100%.
critical minerals, you mentioned the magnets. It's a great example of this. I think batteries, whether it's for electric vehicles, for electric grid generally, for all sorts of uses, is probably one of these things. And so there are a few particular things you want to identify and say, we have to have this. And that's where I would use what's called industrial policy, right? You literally say, we've decided this industry is important, and government, people call this picking winners and losers. It's not picking this company wins, this company loses, but it's picking, we actually have a point of view as a country that we want this thing. Beyond that, one of the things that's so great about tariffs, it's funny, I'm having a lot of fights with this right now, because in my view, tariffs are actually the free market approach. A tariff, it can be a very broad-based policy. You're not picking a particular industry. You're just saying, look, we're going to give an advantage to things made domestically. So whichever things make, relatively speaking, the most sense to make domestically will come back. The things that, relatively speaking, make the least sense.
So we already have that. Like, I'm not sure why anything additional needs to be added in. I mean, we already have that, other than certain specific treaties that have been negotiated. There is no such thing as totally free trade with the United States, other than NAFTA, which even I'll say was complete total disaster, and needed to be renegotiated. But so we're trying to jumpstart manufacturing in the United States, but he's saying all we're going to do in order to do it is put tariffs on everything. There's going to be no, when I tagged this video, that's literally what I said, no government subsidy, but there's going to be no government policy or implementation on modernization of plants, modernization of factories, automation, all these things that you would need in order to manufacture effectively in the United States. We're just not going to do it. We're going to depend on capital to do it. But capital are the ones that shipped everything over there to begin with government's help, with the Republican Party's help. It's not a zero sum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. All right. There were specific incentives in place for companies to ship their manufacturing overseas, regardless of, and it had nothing to do with foreign policy or anything. It has to do with fiduciary responsibility. A CEO could literally be sued if he didn't maximize shareholder value. So unless we fix that, what he's wanting just simply can't be, because there will never be a fiduciary incentive for large corporations to manufacture in the United States. It just won't happen. Private equity won't happen. They won't do the capex unless they get some type of guarantee from the government. So now you're looking at something like Sallie Mae or Freddie Mac that would guarantee capex loans for private corporations, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to. I actually think it's probably something that should happen. The current Small Business Administration is a complete joke. You already have to be a successful business to get anything from the Small Business Administration, and even then it's capped at what Wall Street or anybody else would term. They're not manufacturing companies, that's for sure. They're going to be restaurants, hair salons, those types of small businesses. Very valuable businesses, great, they employ a ton of people, but that's not what we're talking about here. We have those.
To make domestically will stay elsewhere. We don't have to tell people what to invest in. We can just tell people, all things equal, we're giving a 10% advantage to making things here. Now go. And I think.
So, yeah, we already have that, but even 10% really isn't enough. And you can always flip that around. That's actually what China and most other countries do, is they provide the direct incentive inside their own country. They're not going to necessarily hang it on imports, which then get passed on to the consumer. They switch it around and they do a direct subsidy or investment into a specific industry via grant programs and everything else, which we do. You could argue we don't do it effectively. You could argue that it's been cut drastically, but look at health. Look at medical research. That would be a specific industry that the United States invests heavily in through grant programs and everything else, through into universities that then stream out into the private sector through Eli Lilly pharmaceutical companies, biomechanical companies, and the U.S. would not be outside the realm to say that we are a world leader in biotechnology. We are a world leader in medical advances. Now, can the citizens get that? No. well, not necessarily, they're very pricey, but you can't say that in medical research and innovations that come into the medical sector, pharmaceutical sector, the United States is not the world leader. You could easily say that, and it's because of these grants and investments that the government does. So he's providing a solution that's in search of a problem. Now, if you're talking about forging steel, what we would have around here, which is called unskilled labor. And, you can run a screw gun, you can run you can run an impact wrench. Those types of jobs. I mean, you can look at latest polling. Nobody even wants to do those. Like, we can't. Even if they were available, people don't want to do them. And if you put them in rural areas, all you're doing is setting up company towns essentially that will then, nobody wants to do. In my area, there's an abundance of opportunity in jobs. Entrepreneurship, factory labor is huge. But out of my graduating class of about 176 people, I'm one of like 30 that have stayed in the area. And that's it. I mean, I think there's a disconnect between what he sees in his lived experience and what is actually occurring out here in the problem that he's trying to fix. And that's fine. I mean, it's just, we all have our own biases based on where we grew up, where we've lived, and everything else. If you've only lived in big cities or on the coast or anything else, you have a certain perspective on what small town living looks like. And the East Coast has very old factories. And I don't even know if they can be revamped. But there's a lot of space around here. We could easily set up new factories. We just need direct, government grants and investments to do that. But that's not what he's talking about here.
That system is over. What do we want to have replace it? And I think what the United States should want, and what I see the administration pointing toward and pushing toward, is basically, look, we still want to have strong allies. We still want to have free trade among our allies, right? When I was talking about that idea, if you have a tariff on the outside, you can have a freer market on the inside. Ideally, that's not just the US alone. Ideally, that goes for a set of countries that actually are market democracies and do want to play by the rules. And so,
which we currently have, minus China. Fair enough. I mean, China is the target. I don't disagree with that. But we currently have that. There's no blanket need to do anything.
What the US is doing with the tariffs is saying, look, the open season, everyone does whatever they want and unconditionally gets benefits of American defense, American market. That's over. New system. We would like to have strong alliances and relationships and low tariffs, but there are now conditions. Condition one is balanced trade. And again, that's this idea that free trade is great if you're actually trading stuff for stuff and you're doing it in a way that fits with the economic model where it's supposed to work. And so, countries that have been basically taking the most valuable industries for themselves and just selling to us, that's over. Piece number two, on the defense side, everybody needs to pull their own weight and actually lead in their own areas. You want to deter Russia? Germany, go figure out what you need to do to deter Russia.
Okay, this one again. Germany, like Japan, had some specific restrictions on it post World War II on their military. Rightly so. Germans tend to go nuts every 100 years or so. That's just a fact. So again, this is a bit disingenuous. Plus, when we're hammering our allies on defense, we should definitely be cognizant of the fact that they sent troops to Iraq based on our ask, minus France, Germany. But they did. They sent them. Poland, the UK. When we asked, they came. And to kind of do this whole thing where they're not ponying up for their defense, again, it's kind of being a bad neighbor, so to speak.
That system is over. What do we want to have replace it? And I think what the United States should want, and what I see the administration pointing toward and pushing toward, is basically, look, we still want to have strong allies. We still want to have free trade among our allies, right? When I was talking about that idea, if you have a tariff on the outside, you can have a freer market on the inside. Ideally, that's not just the US alone. Ideally, that goes for a set of countries that actually are market democracies and do want to play by the rules. And so what the US is doing with the tariffs is saying, look, the open season, everyone does whatever they want and unconditionally gets benefits of American defense, American market. That's over. New system. We would like to have strong alliances and relationships and low tariffs, but there are now conditions. Condition one is balanced trade. And again, that's this idea that free trade is great if you're actually trading stuff for stuff and you're doing it in a way that fits with the economic model where it's supposed to work. And so, countries that have been basically taking the most valuable industries for themselves and just selling to us, that's over. Piece number 2, on the defense side, everybody needs to pull their own weight and actually lead in their own areas. You want to deter Russia? Germany, go figure out what you need to do to deter Russia. You want to deter...
Okay, so trading stuff for stuff, fair trade, balance of trade. We aren't just trading something for nothing. I kind of get it, and it's a difference on where you want the money to be applied, right? We send money over, we get goods back. That's because they make the goods cheaper than we can, then it costs us less. So we still get the stuff and we're out the money. Now, that's great for businesses. That's great for Wall Street. It's great for finances. That's great for, the money industry. I'm not saying it's not. And then on the backside, it's on, you get cheaper goods. Your water heater doesn't cost $2,000; it costs $1,000. That type of thing. A clip, kind of. I'm going to make this the final clip because there's probably more. Definitely could discuss. Maybe it's another video, but this one shows, in my opinion, Oren's incuriosity as far as history. I think he confirmation bias a little bit. He's basically searched history for things that he can use to bolster his own argument. Keep in mind, I agree with him on a lot of stuff, especially his institute. Not so much on what he's saying here in the interview, but I guess he knows his audience and he does make his money off donations, so it doesn't help to upset the people that make his pay him essentially. So this will be the last one, and this is the most telling as far as the history goes because he makes a statement on trade tariffs and trade embargoes and a trade war could resulting into a real war, and he basically just scoffs at it, dismisses it, and then kind of uses an example that simply doesn't work.
Specifically on China, and they were open about it in the early 70s when Nixon famously went to China, that this will be good for the world because it will de-radicalize China, which is the height of the Cultural Revolution when he said that. So pulling back from that and starting a trade war with China, does that increase the chances of a conflict, a military conflict with China?
I don't think so. I think other things have increased the chances of conflict, right? The fact that since the year 2000, China, rather than liberalizing, has become more authoritarian with more expansionist ambitions, with a massive military buildup, that makes it more likely that we're going to have a conflict. But I think one of the key failures of the blob is that it always tends to live in the world as they wish it were,
right,
rather than the world as it is. Like, I wish we were in a world where China had liberalized. That sounds great, but we don't. I wish we lived in a world where, the U.S. was still the superpower that could essentially dictate terms. When we did a bad job, that was bad, but all things considered, it would be great for the United States.
You want your country to be on top.
Absolutely. Sure. But that's just not the world anymore. It's not a question of should, it's a question of is. And so in the world that we have, the idea that higher levels of trade with China is what's going to diffuse conflict, that's just like a cliche that people say. Who had really close relationships in trade? France and Germany and the UK before World War I and World War II. This idea that...
Okay, this one just cracked me up. There's a book called Guns of Autumn. All right. So World War I, keep in mind, there's a very kind of glorifying of military service. And prior to industrialization, Europe and the world in general didn't really know what the Industrial Revolution was going to do to weaponry in war. The development of the machine gun, development of the tank, chemical weapons. They didn't know any of these things. Prior to that, you're talking like Waterloo, the Three Musketeers. War was a semi-honorable affair, right? And there was quite a kind of cavalier, macho, masculine attitude towards war. And so all these treaty obligations is what, there is actually a term. I'm going to switch this a little bit. So there's an actual term, World War One, which was, and what they called it was going to be a short and glorious war. Very honorable, very, Marquis of Queensberry type rules. And what they got was something completely different, which is why the world was so totally horrified after World War One and trench warfare and all what industrialization and the Industrial Revolution had done to the art of warfare that caused the League of Nations and the idea that this was the war to end all wars. And it had nothing, the cause of World War One really had nothing to do with trade in as much as a very cavalier attitude towards war itself. Prior to that, every other war in history started as basically a trade war or something to do with trade. You have something I want, I'm going to get it. You're charging me too much for that. Well, I have a bigger army, I'll just go take it. World War II, Japan entered it primarily because we instituted an oil embargo on them. That's why they attacked Pearl Harbor. It had nothing to do with a lot of the other stuff. It's they needed oil, and we put an embargo on them. Again, a trade war. Yes, and World War II on the German side, it was balance of trade and high interest rates and all the restrictions that were placed on them after World War One that strangled their economy, and they were having to buy goods outside of Germany, trade, that because of their hyperinflation kept on getting more and more and more and more and more expensive. So yeah, trade is pretty much the basis for war. You have something I want, I'm going to take it. You won't give me what I want, I'm going to fight you for it. It's not that hard, but he's trying to take one specific oddball in history and equate that to, oh, well, because this happened, it can't, trade is not a cause of war, which is just not true historically.
Countries that trade don't go to war with each other isn't actually a thing. And so, conversely, when we entirely decoupled from the Soviet
that's a good one. Yeah. So again, I agree with a lot of what he says. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what he says in this video, or I think he hasn't really thought of the second and third derivatives of his policies. When I was researching for this, and I first read the transcript because an hour and a half video is kind of an ask, but I did pull up some stuff that I just found hilarious because trade tariffs that he's talking about were essentially the cause of furthered the Great Depression. They tried to put the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in. It failed miserably, and the United States just went deeper and deeper into the Great Depression. If I can find it, there's actually a hold on a sec. Okay, I found it because I love old movies. This is straight from Ferris Bueller, and it talks about the situation.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
Yeah, that's basically it. Obviously, tariffs properly applied can be great, but these are not the tariffs we are looking for. And there has to be some type of development behind it through grant programs, reindustrialization, essentially, plant modernization, robotics. Although robotics are sticky with me because I think it's kind of a sewing machine problem. I don't think humanoid robots are necessarily the answer, but that's for people smarter than me to figure out. Anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks for watching.